As we near the end of James chapter 5, stuck right here in the middle is this just another beautiful principle and another great illustration of the necessity in our lives to be patient as God does His work. I'll be honest with you, I struggle in the area of patience. I very much want to see things done, and I want to see them happen quickly, and I want to move quickly through things and move on to the next thing. And God has taught me as I've gotten older through the years that His timing is not my timing. I may quote that verse, but in truth it has begun to be really embedded into my life, understanding that many times God is not behind, He is not slow, but He is actually right on time. And if I had gotten it earlier, it would not have been as good. And if I gotten it any later, it would not have worked out the same way. And so His timing is perfect. But there's a patience in that doesn't come easy for me. And I don't know about you, but maybe it doesn't come easy for you. And so as we look at verse 7 of James chapter 5, actually verses 7 through 12 today, he says, "Therefore be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord." So James is saying, look, hang in there, guys, until the Lord returns. Hang in there. Hang in there. Because there is a patience that is required to do life here on earth. There is a patience that is required because we do not completely understand the ways of God. We don't know how He's working. We don't, even though we have the canon of Scripture before us, there's many things that are not spoken about specifically, many things we don't have details about. And so we sit many times in wonder and in question of what is this going to look like and how is this going to work out and why isn't God doing the way I thought He was going to do and why am I here instead of over there where I thought I would be? And boy, there's so much of this that I just want to hurry through and I want God to just fix it. God just do something. And I'm sure these Hebrews felt the same way as they were, Lord, can you just get us back to home? Can you fix this? Can this persecution go away so that we can get back to living somewhat of a normal life? And so James is speaking into them and he says, look, you're going to have to be patient until Jesus comes. And he gives them an illustration in the next few verses of a farmer. Now this would have been something, especially in their culture, that they would have totally understood because many of them to eat would have farmed their own crops. They would have grown their own trees. They would have done many things to provide food for themselves. And so this was a thing that many people understood. So maybe if you don't come from a farming background, you still are going to understand this. You're going to get the general principles. And so this is what he says. He says, the farmer waits on the rains. And the rain does its job on what the farmer has planted. And there's two rains that he defines. An early rain. So the idea at the beginning of the planting season, as the farmer does all the work of getting the seeds in the ground and getting the soil tilled and just right and getting the fertilizers laid and getting everything set so that these seeds can produce a harvest later on down the road. Then there's an importance of an early rain. And so that farmer's, boy, he's hoping that rain comes because that rain is going to go down into the soil and it's going to get down into there where those seeds are at. And it's going to do its work on that seed as that seed gets rained and it's going to begin to sprout and it's going to begin to do what it needs to do. And eventually it's going to sprout and get above the ground and it's going to grow and it's going to produce the fruit that it was designed to produce. And so James says, just like the farmer, he does all the work and then he's waiting on this early rain. But that's not just the early rain he has to wait for. Because even as the crops begin to come above the ground, and suddenly you can see the shoots of corn, or you can see the little vines of green beans, or you can see all the things that are happening, in the farmer's acreage here, and you're beginning to see signs of life and signs of things happening. If drought hits, if the rain doesn't come, all of this will be for naught because it will dry up on the vine and nothing will be produced, or what is produced will be so little and it won't be good. It won't be worth eating and it will dry up. And so there's another rain that the farmer has to wait on, and it's these latter rains. It's these rains that are going to come in closer to the time of harvest that are going to give these plants one more big shot in the arm as, boy, they're just ready now to pull off the vine, to pull off the stalk, to put into the baskets, to bring into the house, and to enjoy. And so James paints this picture, former rains, latter rains. And he says the farmer has to wait for both in order to ensure he has a great crop. And the same is true of us. God is doing His work in our life. And many times it's we don't even know what's going on. We're like, Lord, I don't understand what you're doing. I don't get it. And I'm working at it. I'm trying to follow after you. I'm trying to pursue you. I'm trying to live the way you've asked me to live. And yet, boy, I'm just, can we just get over, can we just get on with it? Can this be past? Can we get the fruit that we long for? And James says, there's just like the farmer, there's early rain and a latter rain, and you've got to be patient and you've got to wait as God pours out his work on us in intervals in our lives. Things that we don't always understand, but what we know to be true is always this: the harvest is always worth it. God always brings forth a good harvest. It's just true. And so therefore, if I'm patient and I endure hardness as a good soldier, Paul would tell Timothy, and I hang in there, okay, here's what's going to happen. Those latter rains and early rains, they're going to fall. And God is going to do his work. And what is going to be produced? In John 15, Jesus promised his disciples that what would be produced would be an abundance of fruit in our own lives. That they would see an abundance of fruit produced in their lives if they would follow his ways. And they would be patient in waiting on him because he truly is the vine. And so, boy, we've just got to be reminded of this. And this is what James is telling them. And he also goes on to tell them, look, don't complain to one another or complain about one another. You know, in this time of waiting, sometimes we can get irritable. In this time of waiting, sometimes people can get on our nerves or things can get short. And he says, look, don't turn on each other during this time. Don't turn on each other. During this difficulty, you need to be there for one another. And so, you know, it's kind of like a farmers association. All the farmers gather together outside the barn and they're like, hey man, how's it going on your side? Well, boy, I need some rain. Me too. I need rain too. Well, man, we're just going to pray that rain comes in. That's an encouragement. Instead of, you know what, your tomatoes look better than my tomatoes. I think I'm going to go steal some of your tomatoes. Man, what are you doing? I don't like you. You know, there can be, it's so easy to be dissension or short when you're having to be patient and wait on something to come. And so James speaks into this. He says, look, don't complain about one another. He said, look to the prophets for an example. And he gives us the illustration of the prophets in the Old Testament. And he said they suffered and they were patient. And he said, remember how God blessed Job? Do you remember that? How Job suffered so greatly? And yet there was that he endured to the end on this thing. And did you see how God blessed the end of his life? He said, the Lord is compassionate and the Lord is merciful. And the Lord will bless your life. Be patient and wait on him. And you know, what we find is this encouragement. So today I want to encourage you with just a couple thoughts that are just great for us as we wait. And maybe you're in that waiting stage right now and you're like, Reba, I hate this. This is the hardest thing. These are some of the hardest days I've ever gone through as I'm trying to have patience and wait on God to do the work. And so here's a couple thoughts that James gives these people in James chapter 5 and that I want to remind you of today, and that is that Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. There is a day when all of this is going to be done with. And all of it will be, the sinful part and the broken part will be done away with. And we will have a new heaven and a new earth. And it will be all right. And God will wipe every tear from our eye, the Bible tells us. And he will make things right in our lives. And there's a day that's coming. And so keep your eyes focused, not on the dirt of this earth, but keep it focused on the sky. As we think about the fact that, you know what, Jesus could come today. He could return today. And none of this will matter. So Jesus is coming, but also be reminded that Jesus is also going to judge when he comes. And I realize, man, there's things we're not treated right at times, and there's situations where we have been mishandled. We've been deceived. We've been tricked. We've been cheated in some way. And as we think about those things, life is filled with people who don't care about hurting other people. They don't mind at all if they hurt you. And those are difficult days. But you have to remember that as James reminds them, that God knows that. And he will act as the judge. And in the end times, and when Jesus returns, there is going to be a great judgment that will fall out upon the wicked. And so, hang on. God is going to judge. And I know you want to have vengeance and you want to step out there and you want to make it right. But many times that's not the position for us to take. Many times the position for us to take is one, again, of surrender and humility and say, Lord, I'm not the judge, you are, and I'm going to let you act in my stead on this because you've promised that vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. But also, I think it's such a beautiful thing when James reminds them that Jesus is a caring God. When he reminds them that he cares. And that he loves them. In fact, in verse 11, he says, we count those blessed who endured. You've heard of the endurance of Job and have seen the outcome of the Lord's dealings, that the Lord is full of compassion and He's merciful. Don't forget, God loves you. Don't forget, even in the midst of this difficulty, in the midst of the trials, in the midst of all of the things that are falling apart, in the midst of our brokenness, God is full of compassion. He loves us. And if He's allowing us to go through some difficult times right now, if He's bringing those things into our lives for a purpose, it is for a purpose. There's a reason for this. Trust Him in it, be patient in it, and know that He loves you and He is a God of compassion. Because here's the deal. James says as he ends, I love this verse and I love this statement in verse 12. He says, but above all. So he says, boy, after all this, now I think this is so good. It's like, okay, how do anything be better than this? But he says, above all, my brethren, don't swear by heaven or earth or with any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, that you may not fall under judgment. So this is what James says about this. He says, you know what? In your patience and in your endurance, be a faithful person. Be a faithful person. Let your word be accurate. You shouldn't have to say, I swear by my mama's grave I'll do it. You should never have to say that. Why? Because when you say you'll do something, your word ought to be your bond and you ought to do it. So James says, don't be swearing by heaven and by earth, but let your words be the thing that if she says yes, you can count on her. If she says no, you can count on her. You say, well, Reba, what does this have to do with being patient? What does this have to do with the things that James has been talking about, that Jesus is coming and that He's compassionate? It has so much to do with it, because I'm going to tell you, when we go through difficult times, many times the things that fall apart are our character. Our character falls apart. And suddenly we don't care anymore. We don't care about the latter rains, and we don't care about the crops anymore. We just don't care. We're done. And instead of staying with it, and instead of working towards that harvest and the fruit that God is going to bring forth and being patient in that, we just say, you know what, I'm done with it. I'm done. I'm done. And so suddenly we become one of those double-minded people. We're all over the place. People can't count on us. Our word is not true. And our reputation is not one of faithfulness. It's not one of patience. It's not one of longevity. It's one of, well, if it works out quickly, she'll hang around. But if it doesn't, she's going to go find greener pastures. And so James is speaking into that. He says, look, let your life be characterized by one of faithfulness. Let your words be one that are always true. You shouldn't have to swear by something so somebody will believe what you say. Be a person that is always believable, because your character stands for itself. And how do I have that kind of character? How do I enter the pressures of life and in the brokenness of it all? We can only do that through the power of God in our lives. Only through the power of God. So boy, I hope you'll review these things today and ask yourself, where are you at in all of this? Are you finding patience through this difficulties? Patience through the brokenness? Let's get our eyes on Jesus and see what God can do through His harvest, because I promise you, the harvest is coming.